Front Desk, Chapter 8. Who knew that something so basic, pillows, could make someone so happy? After getting Mr. Lewis his pillows and a new key, I went back to the front desk and cut up a bunch of blank cards. I decided to make customer feedback cards. This way, every customer could let us know exactly what they wanted, whether it was extra pillows or extra toilet paper. I put the cards out at the front desk. The next morning, Mr. Lewis took one of my customer feedback cards and scribbled away. For a long while, I sat and stared at his card, afraid to turn it over. Even though he had been nice in the end, I still worried about what it might say. When I finally did turn it over, I braced myself for picky comments regarding the cleanliness of our room or the softness of our pillows. Never in a million years did I expect to read this message. Helpful staff. There was no greater feeling in the world than reading those words. A smile stretched across my face as I got ready for school. I decided to wear my blue and red shirt and polka dot leggings on my first day. When I was all set, I said goodbye to my parents and carried my backpack down the 4 blocks on Meadow Lane. Unlike Coast Boulevard, which was busy and chaotic, Meadow Lane was lined with houses, all with green lawns and mailboxes with little red flags. Still, there were signs that this wasn't completely a nice neighborhood, like metal bars on some of the windows and bikes left outside with only the frame left and no wheels. As I walked, I gave the butterflies in my stomach their usual pep talk. It's going to be okay. I'll make friends, and if I don't, I'll borrow books from the library. This year, there was an additional butterfly. I finally had something cool to tell everyone. I was running a motel. This was sure to blow their minds. The walls of Dale Elementary School were pink and green. On the pink and green walls, there hung a big "Welcome Back" banner. And all around me, kids were scurrying off the bus and into the classrooms. Principal Evans said I was to go to room 12. As I pushed up the pale green door to my new classroom, a room full of kids turned to look at me. A tall woman with red hair and big earrings spun around and waved. "You must be Mia," the teacher said. I nodded. "Welcome, I'm Mrs. Douglas," she said. "Please take a seat." I looked around the room. The seats in the back were already taken, and I didn't want to sit in the front. The other kids peered curiously at me. They were mostly white, but there were also a few black kids and Hispanic kids. No Asians. I took a seat in the middle of the room next to an empty desk and a poster on the wall that said "Wanted, children who love reading." As more kids piled in, Mrs. Douglas asked us to go around the room and tell everyone something about ourselves. "Doesn't have to be big," she said, "just has to be something interesting." "Can it be weird?" someone asked. Mrs. Douglas's eyes opened wide. "I love weird," she exclaimed. We went in alphabetical order, so Alan Adelman had to go first. I watched as he agonized over something sufficiently weird. He finally went with, "I collect things." "What kind of things?" the other kids asked. "Rocks, keychains," he said. My new classmates yawned. Not weird. "Bottle caps, postcards, too." Still not weird. "And fingernails," Alan quickly added. "All my old clippings." Whoops. Too weird. Alan immediately put his hand over his mouth, but it was too late. The other kids stared at him like he was a crow. Alan shriveled under their gaze. Next came Bethany Brett, who looked like she was about 15 something specials about her and couldn't wait to get started. She told us all about her golf game and how she went to this fancy ice skating camp this summer. "Now I can do jumps and twirls and everything," she bragged. Mrs. Douglas beamed at her, clapping her hands wildly, and we all knew who was going to be teacher's pet this year. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath. Here goes. "Hi, I'm Mia. I live and work in a..." I was just about to say motel when the door swung open. "Sorry I'm late," a voice boomed. I turned around, and walking through the door with his shirt half tucked in his pants, looking like he just woke up, was Jason Yao. "So, Mia, what were you going to say?" Mrs. Douglas asked. "Nothing," I muttered. I couldn't believe it. What were the chances of Jason being in the same school, let alone the same class as me? Not only was Jason here, but because he was late, he had to take the only empty desk left, which was right next to mine. Great. "You were about to tell us something. You live and work in a..." Jason shot me a look. A "don't you dare" look. Heat rushed to my cheeks and to Jason's. Why didn't he want the others to know? Nothing, just a normal house, I quickly lied, with a dog. What kind of dog? The other kids were curious. A golden retriever. It was the only type of dog I knew. What color? Golden, I tried. The other kids nodded, satisfied with this information. I let out a sigh of relief as Mrs. Douglas moved on to the next person, while my least favorite person in the world sat in his seat, glaring at me. Jason marched up to me at recess. Let's just make one thing clear, Jason said. You don't know me, and I don't know you. Got it? Whatever, I said. Jason turned and walked away. What was all that about? Was he bothering you? Someone asked. It was a girl from my class who'd walked over, Guadalupe Garcia. I think her name was, or Lupe for short. No, I quickly said. Lupe looked like she didn't believe me. A little, I admitted. Oh, Jason can be so annoying, she said, shaking her head. I smiled. Hey, what happened to your finger? Lupe asked, pointing. I'd taken the toilet paper off and replaced it with a proper Band-Aid my mom gave me, along with an earful on how I should have waited for her. Nothing, I said, hiding the wound with my thumb. So you have a golden retriever? Lupe asked. I nodded slowly. Lupe smiled. Me too. Lupe went on to tell me that on top of a golden retriever, she had 2 other dogs, a pug, and a Shiba Inu. Shibas are hardest to train because they're so smart, she informed me. I politely nodded and concurred that training was very important. She asked me what my dog's name was, and I blurted out Sanjay because I was just thinking about Jason, and Sanjay was Jason flipped around. It just came out. Sanjay? Really? Lupe said. That's an unusual name. I quickly tried to change the subject. So what'd you do this summer? I asked. Lupe told me how awesome her summer was and about her parents, how they brought this giant trampoline. It was in her backyard and she recently did a flip, but her dad wasn't there to see it because he had to go on a business trip. I couldn't stop staring at this girl with a house, a trampoline, and 3 dogs. She sounded so normal. She asked me if I had a trampoline. No, I said. Then my face brightened. But I have a pool. A pool? She gasped, her eyes opening wide. That's amazing. It is pretty amazing, I told her. I didn't tell her the part about how I wasn't allowed to go in, just look at it. Toward the end of recess, I left Lupe to check out the library. She wanted to come with me, but I told her I'd only be 5 minutes. I didn't want her to know what I wanted to look up, which was the price of an electric key machine. My finger was still throbbing, and I wondered how much a safer and easier machine would cost. As I walked toward the library, I heard voices down a dark, empty corridor. It sounded like some kids fighting. I tiptoed closer to get a better look. From the shadows, I could make out 4 big kids. They looked like 6th graders, and they were huddled around another kid. My breath stopped short when I saw the kid in the middle. It was Jason. Take that, Chinese doughboy, the 6th graders taunted him. One of them had his hand on Jason's arm and was twisting it while the other boys were holding Jason back. Ow! Jason cried. That's what you get for being a know-it-all, the 6th graders said. Jason howled as they twisted his arm even harder. Stop, I yelled. The boys spun around and froze. One of the 6th graders smirked. Look, Chinese doughboy has a girlfriend, he exclaimed. My cheeks turned bright red. I'm not his girlfriend, I shot back. I'm not even his friend. Just then, a teacher started walking over. Hey, what's going on? He hollered. Shoo, the 6th graders yelled. Quickly, they let go of Jason and scrambled out of there. After the 6th graders ran away, Jason and I walked silently back to class. I kept looking over at the bruise developing on his arm. I wanted to ask if he was okay, but then I thought about all the horrible things he and his dad said the day before, and I didn't. Chapter 9. I walked home by myself after school, looking over my shoulder as I made the crossing from Meadow Lane onto Coast Boulevard. It was like crossing over into a different world. Back at the motel, I dashed to find my parents to tell them the news that Jason Yao was in my class, but as it turned out, they had other problems to worry about. The washing machine in the laundry room was busted. There was water everywhere, and my dad had foam up to his knees. Quick, he said, pointing to a bucket. Hand me that. I gave him the bucket. It filled in a matter of seconds, and I dragged it out of the laundry room to the parking lot, watching as murky water spilled onto the ground like a tidal wave. As soon as it was emptied, I took it back into the laundry room. Fill and spill, fill and spill. When the last of the water was emptied and the laundry room all wiped down, my parents got on the phone with Mr. Yao. I picked up the receiver in my room so I could listen in. "What now?" Mr. Yao barked. "I'm terribly sorry, but we're going to need a new washing machine," my dad said. "What did you do? Did you break it?" Mr. Yao asked, annoyed. "You idiot!" "He's not an idiot," I yelled into the phone. "Mia, get off the phone," my dad said. I said okay and put the phone down on the table for a second and then very quietly picked it back up. "You're paying for it, and guess what? They're not cheap," Mr. Yao said. "Mr. Yao, please be reasonable," my dad pleaded. "I didn't break it. I just got here. I barely even touched it." "Well, you must have done something because now it's broken. And if you want a new washing machine, you're going to have to pay for it," Mr. Yao said before slamming down the phone. My mother was so furious after the call, she was shaking. "That man!" she shrieked. But no matter how mad she got, there was no avoiding the fact that we had to get a new washer. Mr. Yao had told my dad right before he got off the phone that it would take several days before it could be delivered. My dad paced back and forth in the living room, trying to figure out how he was supposed to live without a washing machine for so long. Every day, the tower of dirty towels from the customers was as tall as me. "Maybe we could send it out," my dad said, thinking out loud, then quickly shook his head when he thought about how much that would cost and who would be paying for it. Certainly not Mr. Tightwad. "What if we told people not to use so many towels?" I suggested. Again, my dad shook his head. "We're a motel. We have to have towels," he said. With a sigh, he turned to my mom and said, "We're just going to have to wash them all by hand." My mom groaned, on top of all the other things they had to do. It didn't take long before the laundry room was teeming with towels. There were piles and piles of them sitting in buckets on the floors, hanging on the door. Every time I walked by the laundry room, there seemed to be more of them, like the towels were meeting each other in the laundry room, getting married and having babies. I knew I had to do something, so I went around to all the weeklies and explained the situation. They were all very sympathetic. They vowed to limit their towel usage to 1 towel a day until the new washer arrived. "Thanks so much for understanding," I said to Hank. He and Billy Bob were in Hank's room cooking hamburgers on Hank's hot plate. "Not a problem," Hank said, throwing patties onto the pan. They didn't have enough ground beef, so Hank was taking a bunch of saltines and mushing them up. Then he added the ground-up cracker crumbs to his ground beef. I watched as he shaped the crumbly ground beef mixture expertly into more patties. "Wow, it looks just like a real hamburger," I said to Hank. "Oh, sure, it tastes like one, too," he said, handing me a cooked one. Gingerly, I lifted the saltine burger to my mouth and took a bite. He was right. It tasted just like the real thing, only crunchier. I devoured the burger. "I'm sorry you guys had to pay for a new washer," Hank said, as he threw more patties onto the sizzling pan. "Typical Mr. Yao, squeezing us for every last penny." He handed me another saltine burger. As I chewed, I thought about how nice it was that Hank lumped us together with the weeklies rather than Mr. Yao. Despite all our efforts, the mountains of towels continued to grow at an alarming rate. There just wasn't enough time to wash all of them by hand every night. That Sunday, I promised to help my dad knock a bunch of them. We put them into buckets, filling the buckets with water and dumping in the laundry detergent. Then we sat down and scrubbed them by hand until our fingers turned into raisins. Even then, there were still dozens of dirty towels left, so many, in fact, that we ran out of buckets. "We're going to have to go to the Home Depot and buy more buckets," my dad said, shaking his head. Buckets were $4.99 each. They were more than a Big Mac cost, and we couldn't even afford those. But I had an idea. I grabbed as many of the rest of the dirty towels as I could and ran toward one of the empty guest rooms. "Follow me," I said to my dad. I headed straight for the bathroom, where I dumped the dirty towels in the bathtub, ran the water, and sprinkled the laundry detergent. "But how are you going to scrub them?" my dad asked. I grinned at him and started rolling up my pants. As soon as my dad saw that, he smiled and started rolling up his, too. We jumped into the tub together, the water sloshing and splashing as the wet towels tickled our toes. We made so much noise jumping and screaming and laughing that my mom came to see what was going on. "What are you guys doing?" she asked. We froze when we saw her bracing for a lecture, but when I peeked at her face, I didn't find a frown. "Scoot over," she said. My mom started rolling up her pants. That afternoon, my parents and I hopped and hopped and hopped, laughing so hard we soon forgot we were washing towels.